So, very good evening to everyone. On behalf of MSN Labs, I, Jignesh Thakkar, National Sales Manager, welcomes all master faculties and eminent guests for the discussion on management of pulmonary fibrosis and cytokine production in COVID-19 patients. Before we proceed for the discussion, I will take a brief introduction about my company. Innovation resonates a sense of purpose in the evolution and existence of human life. The creative capacity of a human mind has always been the source of inspiration. We believe every life matters and everyone deserves quality medicines. Apart from efficacy, affordability, and accessibility, we want to be the first to touch and impact on human lives. We are at MSN, Research for Better Medicine. The quest for innovation drives us to serve better and better today and tomorrow. We at MSN, based at Hyderabad, possess one of the Asia's largest integrated pharmaceutical API and formulation R&D center. Meet the global Indian pharmaceutical company MSN Labs, having global presence. MSN has a turnover crossing $600 million US. We have presence in 63, including US and UK. We have 11,000 workforce globally, and we won the trust of more than 4 crore customers across 65 countries. We have an integrated state-of R&D center and 14 manufacturing facilities in India and USA, thus making Tricolor proud. MSN Research for Better Medicines. With true Indian spirit, making Tricolor proud, as MSN, we have 250 plus products in pipeline. We have 100 plus ANDAs submitted in US. We have 600 plus patent globally. We have 25 products approval in US. We have 715 world largest DMF in US, and we have 20 plus products tentative approval in US. And we have 17 products commercialized in US and having 45 dossiers submitted in other major markets via European, Canada, and Australia. MSN in last 1 decade has introduced many molecules for the first time in India. Start with in 2013, we have introduced Prasugrel, Febuxostate, Tapentadol, and Tolvaptan for the first time in Indian market. 2015, we have introduced Bosentan, Dexlansoprazole, Proflimulast, and Vilazodone in India. 2016, Lurasidone. 2017, Emricentan, Almotriptan, Sildosin, Azilsartan, Mirabegron, Macitentan, and Riosigat. 2020, we have introduced Triantin. And now in 2021, we have introduced Depavan, Secutan, Tofados, and Brivanex. As MSN, we are partner in practice. MSN expertise to research to innovate brought first time in India launches to support super specialty in bringing down Indian patient suffering. A company who to better stand by you. A company with global research, global manufacturing, and global quality. A company which acquired trust globally. We at MSN on a journey to serve you better and better. To partner in creating awareness in management of pulmonary hypertension, fibrosis, and cytokine production in COVID-19 patients, approach for emerging treatment options that to increase the patient's life expectancy and quality of life. I would like to take this privilege to welcome our today's moderator, Professor Dr. Suryakant sir. He is a MD Gold Medalist and he is a well-known personality all India in the field of pulmonology. Dr. Suryakant sir is a professor and head for KGM University, UP Lucknow. He is a member of Institute of Body of AIIMS Patna. He was president of the Indian College of Allergy, Asthma and Applied Immunology from 2018 to 2020. Dr. Suryakant sir was president of the National College of Chest Physicians from 2019 to 2020. He was president of Indian Chest Society from 2016 to 2017. Dr. Suryakant has past president Medical Science Section, Indian Science Congress Association 2013. He is IMA honorary professor. He was chairman of the Indian Medical Association Academy of Medical Specialties, IMA AIIMS UP. He was president of IMA Lucknow. He is a member of editorial advisory board, Journal of Indian Medical Association. So with this, I hand over session to Dr. Suryakant sir. Sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Abhijit, for the kind words and wonderful introduction. So, a very good evening to all of you. Welcome to this wonderful evening, academic evening, I would say. on a very pertinent topic. Two important things are, of course, of primary concern for us, the medical fraternity, and for the community too. That is the cytokine storm and pulmonary fibrosis. And today's evening is basically focused on these two important aspects of the COVID, I would say COVID complications, that is the cytokine storm and pulmonary fibrosis. And we have the learned panel of speakers and panelists in today's evening. And I would like to introduce first all my both my speakers, which will deliver the important talks on the two topics, and of course the two rest of the panelists. So first speaker, I would say it is the Dr. Supreet Batra. He completed his MD in Pulmonary and Critical Care and Medicine. So he is DM in Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine. And he also completed his European Diploma in Respiratory Medicine. So European Diploma in Adult Respiratory Medicine from Italy. And right now he's a head and senior consultant pulmonologist at Critical Care and Sleep Disorder at Batra Hospital and Medical Research Center, New Delhi. So welcome to Dr. Batra. So I think he is the first speaker. So please get ready for your first presentation. The second speaker would be Dr. Piyush N. Joshi. He completed his GNB in Rheumatology and Immunology from PD Hinduja Hospital and Medical Research Center, Mumbai in 2014. Did MD in Internal Medicine in 2010 from BJ Medical College. MBBS from Srimati NHL Municipal Medical College, Ahmedabad in 2007. And right now he's consultant rheumatology, integrate international label healthcare, NHS health system. So having experience of managing outpatient in medicine and oncology from some of the busiest outpatient department. Also having great exposure to private practice. In UK had a lot of done in rheumatology, have managed almost routine and also very complex patient in rheumatology. He has great exposure to all elderly patients with multiple comorbidities with rheumatological problems and have a lot of publication related with rheumatology. And we have two more panelists in the last, as we have the panel discussion followed by two lectures. So Dr. Akshay Buddhiraja is there as an esteemed panelist. And he completed his MD in Respiratory Medicine and did his fellowship from Interventional Pulmonology in Vedanta Hospital. Presently, he's a consultant and head Department of Respiratory and Sleep Medicine in Akash Healthcare Super Specialty Hospital, Dwarka, Delhi. He's a principal investigator for so many research projects. He performed a lot of bronchoscopy and interventional things, EBUS, etc. And he had membership in various professional and scientific bodies. He participated in several presentations and different academic events, and his scientific articles are published in various national and international journals. So we have this 4 doctors as an academic speaker and panelist. So I think first I invite Dr. Batra to present his talk on cytokine storm in COVID-19. Dr. Batra, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction. Actually, my topic is pulmonary fibrosis and its complications.
I said it, upload it. So first topic is pulmonary fibrosis. Dr. Batra, please go ahead.
So can you see my screen now?
First slide is visible now.
Okay, sir. Thank you for the introduction and thank you MSN for giving this opportunity. So today my topic is pulmonary fibrosis and long-lasting life-threatening complication. As we know, we are going through this COVID pandemic. So as we all know, SARS-CoV has created one of the most massive pandemics in the modern history, with the lung fibrosis as an emerging and the delayed complication and affecting at least 1/3 of the population. A brief insight of pulmonary fibrosis resulting as a consequence of COVID-19 infection will be emphasized in this lecture. As we know, COVID is at its peak at this point of time. Last year we had a peak and then we had a downfall in the last 3 months. But since last 1 month, we have seen the huge surge in the number of cases, and almost 4 lakh cases have been diagnosed every day. So what happens to the patient with COVID? As we see, 95% of the patients in the acute phase of illness have low to moderate symptoms, and out of them 81 have mild symptoms like fever, cough and dyspnea. Only 14% of the patients develop respiratory distress and hypoxemia, and 5% of them develop respiratory failure and severe and become critically ill. And among those 5%, 20% have a very poor prognosis and mortality. whereas among 30 to 50% will have a delayed complication which leads pulmonary fibrosis, and among 30 to 50% may also among them recover fully also. But the complication which is delayed and persists and starts usually after the recovery phase, it's usually the pulmonary fibrosis which affects the severe and critically ill patient and leads them to at hospital, and they are staying with oxygen or delayed or oxygen at home. So what are these people called? These are called long haulers. Increasing number of patients worldwide who survived COVID-19 continue to battle the symptoms of illness long after they have been tested negative. 70 to 80% of who are recovered from COVID-19 have at least one or more symptoms, maybe body ache to severe to body aches to mild fatigue and dyspnea on exertion. And some people are requiring long-term oxygen and even lung transplantation due to the lung fibrosis. Some people also develop cardiac abnormalities, and also some people have developed stroke, though they have become COVID negative, and leading to significant impairment in their quality of health. So what is a pulmonary fibrosis? It is one of the sequelae of COVID-19 pneumonia, which accounts for mortality in a substantial proportion of these patients. Nearly 1/3 of recovered patients develop some kind of fibrotic abnormalities. What are the radiological manifestations? Have been detected as early as 3 weeks after the onset of symptoms, regardless of the severity of the infection. And in fatal cases of COVID-19, we have seen that in autopsy studies that there will be organizing diffuse alveolar damage is a pathological hallmark in those people. So what are the risk factors of COVID-19 for developing pulmonary fibrosis? It is same as with IPF. It's advanced age, illness severity, more common in males than females, and those who have comorbidities like hypertension and diabetes, and the other man-made problems, that is the length of stay, the mechanical ventilation. Those who have severe disease like ARDS, and those who are smokers and chronic alcoholic have more fibrotic tendency for more fibrosis and lung pulmonary involvement. So what is the pathogenesis of COVID-19 fibrosis in COVID-19? As we have all seen, that the COVID-19 virus first enters the lungs through an alveoli. They bind to the ACE2 receptors to the spike protein and then enter the alveoli. And in the alveoli, they cause epithelial endothelial injury, leading to which there is disruption of membrane and there is reflux of neutrophils. What happens then? There is influx of neutrophils. There will be inflammation. There is release of oxygen, ROS. There is ROS generation, and that leads to inflammation. At the same time, the virus also starts replicating inside the cell and leads to production of viral proteins, and it halts the synthesis of host proteins. And when the virus inside the cells leads to cytoskeletal rearrangement, and then it is released. So all these processes leads to the final pathways inflammation. And also those patients who are ARDS or severe disease or pneumonia, due to the mechanical ventilation also causes biotrauma, volume trauma, and barotrauma. All these factors increase the fibrotic tendency, they increase the inflammation and let the inflammation the common pathway, and people manifest in the lungs. Then inflammation is manifested in many forms. They have pneumonia, they may be having consolidation, organizing pneumonia, they will be having ground glass opacities. But what is the outcome? Most of the people, as we have discussed, like 80 up to 90% of people recover. Only 5 to 10% of people develop the severe disease, and some out of them, 1/3 of patients may develop fibrotic complications, though may be stable or a progressive fibrosis. So mechanism of pulmonary fibrosis is COVID-19 is different from IPF, especially with pathological findings. It points to alveolar epithelial cell being the site of injury and not the endothelial cells. So what are the radiological findings of pulmonary fibrosis in COVID-19? As we all know, what happens, we expect in a case of ILD or a fibrosis, we expect an interstitial thickening, we expect an air bronchogram, we think interlobular septal thickening, we expect a reticular pattern and fibrotic parenchymal bands and pleural effusion. These are the two pictures where we can see is extensive ground glass opacities along with consolidation and the interlobular septal thickening. And in the other picture, we can also see there is a traction bronchiectasis along with the ground glassing and peripheral consolidations. So all these things are the COVID-19, at the same time they have an active disease as well as there is a fibrotic stage, both going on all together at the same time. and it can be seen as early as 3 weeks old. There are few case reports also which are documenting that fibrotic changes do happen, and it has been seen in the explanted lungs also, where the lung transplantation people have gone on to lung transplantation. And all these autopsy studies, they have suggested that they have seen interstitial fibrosis, they have seen the microscopic honeycombing and bronchular fibrosis. And the CT scan also shows volume loss and traction bronchiectasis, along with interlobular septal thickening and band-like parenchymal bands. This is another study by Zia et al. In which he showed that architectural distortion, bronchial dilatation, volume loss in bilateral lungs were suggestive of fibrotic changes in patients with COVID-19. So these are the few case reports. Then how to diagnose fibrotic lung disease and standard protocol versus COVID-19 modified approach. As we all know, when a patient approaches to our clinic in a patient with an ILD, we do an initial clinical examination, look for the Krebs and look for a clinical lung clubbing. Then we go for a history and physical examination and do a CTD serology. Along with that, we also go for a occupational and environmental history, which is also point towards some of the ILDs like hypersensitivity pneumonitis. And then we go for HRCT chest and PFT. But in COVID-19, as we all know, the disease spreads to aerosol generation, droplet infection. So we can defer the point 4, that is PFT. We can mainly have a video conferencing, discussing with the patient, take a history, do the marker studies, and do a CT scan. Then if the CT scan points towards some potential cause or associated condition, if it looks like UIP, definite UIP, then okay, it's an IPF. But if the CT scan is not suggestive of a probable UIP or an alternative diagnosis, we can have a multidisciplinary discussion, including a radiologist, chest radiologist, maybe a lung pathologist, and along with the chest clinician. Then in that case, in usual times we can do a BAL to rule out hypersensitive pneumonitis if lymphocytosis is more than around 40%, or we can go for surgical lung biopsy, and then we can come to MDD and make a diagnosis. But is in COVID times, we have to discuss about whether invasive procedure is required or not, or we can just go with a discussion and among the pathologist, radiologist, and the clinician would come to a common diagnosis. And most of the times, this is 50 to 80% it is coherent, and the diagnosis is made. There are some unclassifiable IRDs also, which accounts for less than 50%. But if the specific diagnosis is not made, then it may not be an IPF, and we have to classify them as non-IPF ILDs or non-IPF fibrotic lung disease. So what is the management of pulmonary fibrosis following COVID infection? There has been multiple remedies suggested on the basis of mechanism like antivirals, like remdesivir, lopinavir. All this inhibit viral replication, and it is said that if a viral replication is less, leading to less severe pneumonia, and there will be less fibrosis based on this mechanism. Then there are other drugs also which we are using for IPF, as well as the spironolactone and hyperbaric oxygen. And there are few traditional Chinese medicines and also plasminogen activation. But currently there is no fully documented therapeutic method in the treatment of post-inflammatory, because as we all know, the fibrosis in COVID is basically it's post-inflammation, secondary to any infection. As we get in post-ARDS also we get fibrosis, as different from an IPF, where the inflammation is not there. It's purely a fibrotic lung disease due to myofibroblast or formation. So currently there is no fully documented therapeutic method in the treatment of post-inflammatory pulmonary fibrosis after COVID infection. However, some therapies may be considered. There is also a therapeutic role for the use of licensed antifibrotic in acute exacerbation IPF, including those triggered by viral infections. So management of pulmonary fibrosis, role of antifibrotic therapy. We all know antifibrotics have been a documented evidence in IPF, and we have conducted our randomized controlled trials, and they have shown to decline the lung function and in FVC and the prevention of further progression of pulmonary fibrosis. Even they are very useful in progressive PF-ILDs also. So we have got two antifibrotics like pirfenidone and nintedanib. Both exert potential benefits in prevention and treatment of pulmonary fibrosis. What is their mode of action? Pirfenidone is both is both anti-inflammatory, anti-fibrotic, and as well as had got antioxidation effects. It attenuates lung injury because pirfenidone reduces LPS-induced lung injury and also subsequent fibrosis. Pirfenidone also has a down-regulating effect on cytokine like TGF beta 1, which is the main regulator in pulmonary fibrosis, and as well as CTGF, that is connective tissue growth factor and platelet-derived growth factor. In addition to being a ROS scavenger, it also down-regulates ACE receptor expression, which is one of the major receptor for COVID virus binding and entry into the lung or alveoli. So other characteristics of pirfenidone that makes an appropriate treatment for COVID-19 is its anti-apoptotic and anti-fibrotic effects. So how we start the pirfenidone? Usually, pirfenidone is started in an initial titrated dose. We start with usually 260 milligram capsules are available now in a TID dose from 1 to 7 days, and follow up with liver function test every week and escalate the therapy to maximum dose of 2,400 milligrams per day. That is 9 capsules per day. Some people do not tolerate this much dose, so we can come down to a lower dose of 1800 milligrams also, whatever dose is tolerable. And at the same time, we have to monitor the adverse effects. Usually, it's photosensitivity reactions, GI, upper GI symptoms, and rashes. And if patient develops significant lung disease, liver disease, if the ALT and AST are raised then more than 5 times or more than 3 times with symptoms, or there is evidence of severe liver damage, we can stop the drug and reintroduce slowly, or sometimes may require permanent discontinuation. So, what are the therapeutic benefits of starting a pirfenidone? It slows the decline in lung function, that is FVC. It slows the progression of lung fibrosis. It increases the 1 year, 2 year survival and stabilizes the lung function, and also causes improvement in SpO2 and during 6-minute walk test. There are 2 antifibrotics are available to us, pirfenidone and nintedanib. So nintedanib is also a very good antifibrotic, which can slow the progression of pulmonary fibrotic disease by inhibiting the release of pro-inflammatory and pro-fibrotic mediators. But however, nintedanib is associated with increased risk of bleeding because it is also triple kinase inhibitor, anti-VEGF, anti-PDGF, and anti-FGF. So it is a vascular endothelial growth factor inhibitor and may lead to bleeding. So that's why nintedanib has a slightly increased risk of bleeding with nintedanib, or those who are a patient with anticoagulant. As we all know, patient with COVID are on antifibrotics, are on steroids along with low molecular weight heparin, anticoagulants also. So nintedanib is maybe a risk in that it may increase the risk of bleeding in those possible. So because of this possible interaction, nintedanib and anticoagulant seems to be an important issue which can tackle this, and maybe a pirfenidone is much safer. Those need a dose escalation in this group of patients. Then current other treatment options for preventing pulmonary fibrosis in COVID-19, as we all know, it's basically a post-inflammatory fibrosis. So the rationale for use of steroids in viral pneumonia is to decrease the host inflammatory response, and also may prevent the development of ARDS or ALI. Although there is no evidence of efficacy of steroids in treating pulmonary fibrosis, they are commonly used in empirical therapy for post-inflammatory pulmonary fibrosis, as we are maybe using in post-ARDS fibrosis also. However, the use of steroids is controversial. There is no direct evidence, or there are no randomized controlled trials to prove its efficacy. On the contrary, current research suggests that do not to administer systemic steroid during COVID-19 infection, as they might delay the clearance of virus from the body and may lead to increased secondary infections. Spironolactone is one of the other drugs which is supposed to be inhibit fibrosis by its mechanism of inhibiting the mineralocorticoid receptor activation, and partially responsible for the increase in extracellular matrix turnover, which is observed in pulmonary fibrosis. So there are no direct studies or randomized controlled trials that present the beneficial effects of mineraloreceptor antagonist in post-viral fibrosis, but it could serve as a potential treatment option for patients, and though we have limited options for treating this pulmonary fibrosis. Then we have other treatment called tissue plasminogen activator in patients with those who have severe ARDS or PF ratio less than 50, and despite proning and mechanical ventilation appear to be a candidate for a tissue plasminogen activator. though in those patients in places where ECMO is also not widely available. In these scenarios where no mechanical ventilation is available, TPA may be an appropriate rescue therapy for patients who are progressively deteriorating or having a severe ARDS. Note, it is important to that thrombocytopenia may be present in this patient, so we have to be very careful because it may increase the chances of bleeding in this group of patients. Then the other treatment options will also be there, like lopinavir, ritonavir, those antivirals that may and hydroxychloroquine, they may inhibit the coronavirus cell receptor glycosylation and modulate the immune system. Teicoplanin also has been suggested has a mild antiviral effect because it inhibits the first stage of COVID virus in human cells. And favipiravir may also be one of the possible treatment options behind the COVID-19 because it has been shown to inhibit virus reproduction in vitro. What is the basis for all these medicines is to prevent the viremia, decrease the stage of viremia so that the severe pneumonia or the which complication ARDS do not happen. But all these medicines are have shown in vitro response, but nothing has proved to be effective against COVID-19 and preventing its pulmonary fibrosis. What are the strategies to reduce potential exposure to COVID-19 in patients with fibrotic interstitial disease? That patients, as we all know, should Government of India guidelines practice social distancing, they should avoid going to crowded places, they should practice hygiene practices, wash their hands, they should investigations. It's very important. Defer the non-essential blood work or things. Consider less frequent routine blood monitoring or use of scheduled or mobile laboratory services. They should avoid non-urgent pulmonary function testing, which are responsible for aerosol generation and risk to both the person who is doing it and to the society. And also avoid non-urgent imaging. Nowadays, we have seen people are going for a lot of CT scans, day 1, day 3, day 7. That also should be avoided because it not only increases radiation exposure, but also exposes the person to the risk of COVID-19 in the society, in the outside world. And also avoid procedure that would not change immediate treatment, means try to avoid all non-emergency procedures and surgeries if it is possible. And support viral rehabilitation educational initiatives. Patients should be given oxygen supplementation at home and lung rehabilitation practices. They should consider how COVID-19 impact risk and benefits of initiative containing ILD therapies and multiple modified drug eligibility and funding criteria to reflect limited access to pulmonary function test and multidisciplinary review. And also, they should also discuss the early discussion of advanced care directives and end-of-life care and with referral to palliative care services when it is appropriate. So my take-home message is, considering huge number of individuals affected by COVID-19, even real complications like post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis, though in less than 5%, will have major health effects at a population level. Elderly patients who require ICU care and mechanical ventilation are the highest risk to develop lung fibrosis. Pirfenidone, though it could inhibit apoptosis, down-regulate ACE receptors expression, decrease inflammation by several mechanisms, and ameliorate oxidative stress, and protect pneumocytes and other cells from COVID-19 invasion and cytosine storm simultaneously, and may prevent the lung fibrosis, which is a threatening complication in this group of patients, and they are debilitated and on long-term oxygen therapy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Batra. Wonderful disposition on the pulmonary fibrosis, which is a very important post-COVID complication or sequelae, I would say. And as you mentioned that 1/3 of the such population is suffering from this pulmonary fibrosis. And a lot of people, they are also having desaturation after that. And a lot of people, they require pulmonary rehabilitation, home oxygenation, and of course, a lot support of or supportive things for their management. So I request now Abhijit to have some, of course, pharmaceutical presentation from MSN. And then, of course, after we'll take the second lecture. Mr. Abhijit. Abhijit, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Good evening
Please.
once again. Good evening once again from our side. And on behalf of MSN, once again, just 1 minute, I would like to take all of yourself, sir. As you can see, sir, there is a panic buying happening in the marketplace for all the COVID flu medicines. And there is most of the medicines are getting vanished from the market side. And especially two medicines, that is remdesivir and favipiravir, we are finding that there is an extreme shortage of these medicines happening in the marketplace. So MSN is taking care of this thing very well and addressing the shortage of COVID flu medicines through our, we have got Favilo, which is available in all possible strengths, that is 200, 400 and 800 mg. As at the same time, we have also made available Tofadose, which is our tofacitinib, available in 5 mg. One thing very important to share, that this all medicines are available in all e-pharmacies, so patient can buy itself on their from home itself. And one more important thing, sir, that we do have got the supportive COVID flu brands also, like Pulmofib. We made available the first time this US FDA has available strengths of Pulmofib, that is 801 strength, which is taking care of the pills burden in these patients. And at the same time, we are also taking care of the anticoagulant therapy also, that is Davifib, the brand of Davigatron, available in all possible strength, that is 75, 110 and 150. Sir, one thing very important to share, that we are not looking towards the today's scenario, but we are looking towards the tomorrow scenario also, and we are coming with a future advanced molecule to battle against this COVID-19. As you can see that we are very shortly coming with a baricitinib molecule, which is a selective Janus kinase inhibitor. And next, we are also coming with the molnupiravir molecule, which is having a very rapid onset of action and has got rapid action within a 24 hours only. Our molecule, our brand name will be Molulo. And we are also coming very shortly with the aviptadil injection also, which is Avilo, which is a selective vasoactive intestinal peptide. So together, our fight will be there in the for COVID against COVID-19, sir, with all possible brands, with Favilo, Tofadose, and Pulmofib and Davifib. Once again, I would like to hand over the session to you, sir.
Thank you, Abhijit. It is your evening. Of course, you have to sensitize our medical fraternity for your newer interventions, for newer products, so that society, this is basically for the benefit of the society. We want to save more and more our fraternity, more and more our community people in this pandemic. That is the purpose of, that's why we have joined hands together. The medical fraternity has joined hands with the pharmaceutical houses, of course, to provide the better care, advanced care, perfect care for the sufferer, that is the people of India suffering from COVID-19. So I think this is the high time to thank Dr. Dr. Batra and now invite to Dr. Joshi. I've already introduced the Dr. Joshi. Dr. Joshi is from, Dr. Joshi will speak on a new approach to manage cytokine storm in COVID-19. That's a very important, I would say, the difficult task to manage the situation of COVID-19 complication is the cytokine storm. So, Dr. Joshi, please.
Hi, am I visible? My screen is visible to all of you?
Sure.
Okay, so I should start. So, my idea is to talk about how we manage cytokine storm, because cytokine is basically a forte for us. So that's why I'm talking on the same. So we all know about COVID-19 and how the pandemic has affected all over the world and how it has changed medical system also. Basically COVID-19, we have three phases. First is early infection phase, where we have a flu-like symptoms. But this is a phase where there is a viral replication happening, and that is the major part of illness. And that's where the drugs which prevent the viral replication or viral entry inside the cell come into picture, like the remdesivir and all the drugs. The second phase is pulmonary phase, where we have a pulmonary edema, we have a pneumonia and ARDS, and that's where the cytokine also comes into picture. But there is also viral replication going on. But the third stage is hyperinflammatory phase, where we have a more and more inflammatory cytokine causing the issue. And that's where not much viral replication is happening. And that's where the role of immunosuppression to prevent the viral replication, to prevent the inflammatory stage to damage the cell, that is come into picture. Now, as we all know, the virus causing the cell damage is there. But more than that, the host immune system causing the fighting against the virus, it causes more organ damage in patient with viral illness. And that's where we have to be very sure about that, what we are giving and at what stage we are giving what drug. So in initial viral replication, when the viral cell enters the body, this is how it has the replication inside the cell, and that's how the exocytosis happens. And in this stage, your other drug like remdesivir or flupiravir is the mainly effective in this stage. Once any virus enters the cell, what happens? The body has an interferon response to fight against the virus. Interferons prevents the viral replication, prevents the viral entry inside the other cells, and that's how it prevents the body from storming effect of virus. Now, there are two kind of disease which we have seen in COVID-19. There are people who have a very good interferon response, and there are people who have a blunted interferon response. The people who have a good interferon response, they have once the viral enters the cell and they have a viral replication, there is a viral load. Body will have a good interferon response, and the viral replication reduces, and the patient's disease activity also reduces with time. And that's how we have a mild to moderate disease. But in the people who have a higher viral load and they have a lesser interferon response or blunted interferon response, they have a more viral replication, more cell damage, and more inflammatory phase that leads to more and more disease activity. So that's how all the cytokines like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, they come into picture. Now we have a pulmonary phase where we have a pneumonia. We have an inflammatory phase where there is the cytokine overproduction, and we have a prothrombotic phase which leads to thrombosis, and that's where we give heparin and it leads to less and less death. So this is what I have already talked about, how the virus goes inside the cell, how it affects one systems sequentially inside our body. Now in inflammatory phase, how it affects. So once the virus enters the cell, it enters the dendritic cells, and in dendritic cells, that's the innate immune system. From that, it produces more and more cytokines, and it affects more and more lymphocytes, and that's how it drives the whole pathology. So, as you can see from dendritic cells, there are JAK state pathways that releases various cytokines. This cytokines induces various T helper cells, that is Th1, Th2, Th17, T regulatory cells, and that leads to more cytokine production. This cycle goes in and goes on and on. So this state pathway, we are very interested about this pathway, because if we block state pathway, you are blocking all kind of cytokines. And if you block all cytokines, then you prevent the cytokine storm. So various drugs, that how they are used is in initial days you use remdesivir, but afterwards you use dexamethasone, baricitinib, tocilizumab, or other kind of JAK inhibitors. Now, the first trial that was done was a tocilizumab in patient with COVID-19. That is a COVECTOR trial. In this trial, they have used this drug in patients who are requiring mechanical ventilation or who are very ill. They enroll 161 patients in tocilizumab drug, when they found that tocilizumab was not superior to placebo in preventing mechanical ventilation or death. Now, there are very many policies in the design of this trial. Basically, they use very severe patient. Also, they have used the patient where cytokine storm has already set in, and they have not taken the early patient. That's how they have not got the response. All the people who are using tocilizumab in COVID, they will agree that it works very nicely in a patient whom we use at the start of illness. If we use at start of illness of cytokine storm, so that is between around day 7 to day 12, then you will have a good response to tocilizumab in such patients. So they haven't found any major benefit of tocilizumab in patient. No benefit in mortality, no benefit in oxygen therapy or ICU stay. So the second drug which was found to be very good is a recovery trial where they have used a simple drug, very cheap drug. This is a dexamethasone. They have used in a patient with COVID-19 in the dose of 6 milligram once a day for up to 10 days. And they found a very good response. They have found that it reduces mortality. Dexamethasone, when it is used after 5 days, it reduces mortality. It reduces the oxygen requirement. It reduces the mortality in patients who are on mechanical ventilation or who are requiring oxygen therapy. Now, very good. The last slide, if you see that dexamethasone doesn't do any change in mortality in the people who are not requiring oxygen. So, in OPD basis, giving dexamethasone might not be as beneficial as we think. So, in this chart, they have shown that it reduces the invasive mechanical ventilation and it reduces mortality in patients requiring oxygen only. The third trial that came into market is baricitinib with remdesivir in a patient with COVID-19. So none of the previous trial was done with remdesivir. This trial was done baricitinib with remdesivir. We have seen the trial of remdesivir where it is found to be reduces the hospital stay. But adding the baricitinib with remdesivir after 5 days of COVID-19, how it affects. So they have taken total around 1,000 patients. They have seen that median time to recovery reduces in patients who are on Baricitinib. But more than that, the patient who are requiring high flow oxygen or non-invasive ventilation, they found that Baricitinib with remdesivir reduces the hospital stay significantly by 8 days. So the Baricitinib people require only 10 days. There are no major serious adverse event or no major infection also they are found. So basically, it is a wonderful drug in that sense. Now, how this basically happen? Why this X? How JAK-STAT pathway works? So all the cytokines like interleukin-1, interleukin-6, they get attached to the JAK receptors. From JAK, the state gets released, and the state goes inside the cell, and which causes more inflammatory cytokine production. So when you give Olumiant or when you give Baricitinib, Olumiant is Baricitinib, so it prevents this formation, and the state is not released, and that's how the whole cytokine storm is prevented by this. Now, these are the various JAK pathways. There is JAK1, JAK2, JAK3, TYK1, TYK2, and these are the various molecules that works through this pathway. So, if you block JAK pathway, then you are blocking all these molecules. So, rather than blocking only interleukin-6, you are blocking the whole inflammatory cascade. And that's how we think that JAK pathways might be working much better than others. Now, amongst the JAK, there are various JAK inhibitors. There are 3 which are commercially available till today, and 2 are available in India, Baricitinib and Tofacitinib. So the Baricitinib works on basically viral cell entry also. So there is a potential antiviral effect also, and confirmed anti-cytokine effect is also there with Baricitinib. So amongst these 3, Baricitinib, Tofacitinib, and Upadacitinib. So Upadacitinib is not available in India, but Baricitinib and Tofacitinib are available. And Baricitinib blocks both JAK1 and JAK3. Yeah, while Tofacitinib blocks both JAK1 and JAK3, but Baricitinib specifically blocks JAK1 and JAK2. So there are more thromboembolic events with Tofacitinib than Baricitinib. That is something that we have to keep in mind. So where the picture comes, so the cost difference is major issue. Baricitinib costs around 700 rupees per tablet. Tofacitinib costs 40 rupees per tablet. So using Tofacitinib is much more useful in people in India because the cost is a major issue here. So do we have a trial? So we do have a trial. So in this trial, they've used Tofacitinib along with dexamethasone in patients who are having COVID-19 pneumonia. So among their total 360 patients with COVID diagnosis, and 269 they have done they have taken into trial. 138 patients were on Tofa, and other patients were on dexamethasone. They found giving only Tofacitinib, not with dexamethasone, improves the mortality. So there is a definite mortality benefit with Tofacitinib. So there is no hyperglycemia involved if you are not giving dexamethasone, and there is no increase in infection also that has been proven with Baricitinib. So this is a summary of all the clinical trial with Tofacitinib. And they found there is a definite mortality benefit, there is definite reduced ICU admission, and there is definite early discharge which is possible with Tofacitinib. So what to watch out for when you give Tofacitinib? Any associated infection, you never give Tofacitinib because you are depressing the immune system. It works only on inflammatory phase, not fibrotic phase. So once the patient has fibrosis, you know that there is a fibrotic phase, CRP and IL-6 are normal, don't give Tofacitinib. There is a slight increased chance of thromboembolism, so always look out for that. So you should be looking for that. So what is my opinion on Tofacitinib? So Tofacitinib has a definite role after 5 days of illness once the initial viral replication halts. It is better indicated in patients who after 5 days have high CRP, who are running fever, whose SpO2 is less than 94. So you are preventing this patient to go towards the hospitalization. You are preventing this patient to go towards oxygen requirement. You are preventing this patient, if they are having oxygen requirement, to prevent them from non-invasive ventilation. It's a safe drug, so you can give on OPD basis also. It reduces the hospitalization. In my experience with both the drugs, so tocilizumab, in my opinion, works much better. But there is an availability issue also. Cost is sometimes a constraint. If that is not an issue, then you can definitely give tocilizumab. But otherwise, Tofacitinib was also equally good drug. So it may help in reducing hospitalization, NIV support, and in mortality also. It if we prevent the cytokine storm, we might be preventing long-term complication like pulmonary fibrosis. That is my take on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. Very precisely, I would say, in a very short time, you have given it, of course, beautiful picture. Rather, it is an optimistic picture. And of course, cytokine storm is not an easy thing to control it. It's a challenging for us, challenging for the fraternity, and challenging for the society, for the pharmaceutical houses also, how to deal, how to cope up with this cytokine storm, and how to save our people, how to reduce mortality, how to reduce hospitalization, how to keep, of course, the patient shifting from the oxygen flow, high oxygen flow from an IV to the ventilatory support, and of course, post-COVID complications. So that the beautiful and optimistic picture given by you and of course the latest development in the field of management of cytokine storm. So I think this is the high time. Abhijit, I will be able to ask a few questions and then I have to switch over some other webinar. I'm very sorry for that. Even my panelists will be there, esteemed panelists will be there. So I will start my role. The first question is, of course, is going to Dr. Batra. Is post-COVID fibrosis reversible? Dr. Batra, please.
COVID fibrosis reversible?
Yeah, is post-COVID fibrosis reversible?
Sir, we have only experience of last 1 year, but as far as I have seen the cases, most of the patients have recovered. Most of the patients we have seen after 1 to 2 months or maybe 3 months, fibrosis have gone. But I'm not denying the fact that fibrosis is not there. Fibrosis is there definitely. 5 to 10% of patients have definite fibrosis, and we are giving antifibrotics to them, and they are doing well. And I've been managed to get them off oxygen, but I will not say that their lung functions have declined. Their lungs have declined, but they are stable. So they have fibrosis. By giving antifibrotics, I'm able to get them wean off oxygen. But fibrosis is definitely there, and most of the patients have reversible, but some 5 to subset of patients have definite fibrosis, and that is there.
Yes, Dr. Batra, you are right. Of course, we have to observe, I think, for a few months also, because it's still only we have the experience of treating the, of course, COVID-19 only 14, 15 months. So I think the time will tell that how long COVID and how long it goes. So it is post-COVID or long COVID. I don't know how long it will go. It may persist for 6 months or even more than that. And how many they require, how many they respond to the antifibrotic drugs, how many they respond to chest physiotherapy, how many do they respond of course, other supportive treatment. It is, of course, the time will tell. Another question is, I think, Dr. Akshay Buddhiraja is there. Has he joined? Okay,
Yeah,
Akshay.
good evening.
Akshay, this is question for you. How to choose the two drugs out of the two drugs, pirfenidone versus nintedanib? A long debate. Still, of course, debate is true for the post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis also. So, what is your personal experience? How you choose, or what is your evidence-based recommendation that how will you choose the one of the antifibrotic, that is pirfenidone versus the nintedanib?
So, sir, it is a very difficult decision. Initially,
That's why I asked you, Buddhiraja. Your name is starting with the Buddhi. That's why.
So initially, in the first the spike of COVID, we started giving patients pirfenidone, as nintedanib was very expensive, and we tried it on all patients in every phase. Initially, in the early phase, in the inflammatory phase, and even in post-COVID phase, when scarring has already happened and the patient has recovered, but he has still a baseline oxygen requirement of 2 to 3 liters, and they are on domiciliary oxygen. So, but we have also tried in some patients nintedanib, and in both the patients we have seen minimal results. There is no significant difference. Even in those patients in whom we are not giving nintedanib and pirfenidone, they also do recover after, say, 6 to 8 weeks or 12 weeks on their own. So we do give, if the patient is on domiciliary oxygen, he's being discharged after day 14, day 17, we do give a small dose of steroid, and we overlap it with an antifibrotic agent, and gradually we wean off the steroid thing and we continue with pirfenidone in increasing doses if it is not causing any adverse effect. So we have to look for the liver function test, and at this time it is very difficult for the patient to go for lab tests. And if the lab test, if the SGOT, SGPT is raised, say 2 folds or 3 folds, then they get worried, and all these things happens. But in my opinion, there is no role of or low, not definite low, no role, but less role of antifibrotic during the inflammatory phase. We can give it during the recovery phase or the post-COVID phase. And if the fibrosis is more, say the CT severity score is above 20 and he is requiring oxygen at home as well, so we can try that, but there are no results. The difference in the result is not significant if we give antifibrotic and if we don't give antifibrotic.
Okay, Akshay. So I think this is also a debatable issue, and of course, debate is going on. The questions will be asked in every webinar. And Dr. Sunil Verma, have you joined? Yes, Sunil Verma has joined. Abhijit, Dr. Sunil Verma has joined?
No, sir.
Abhijit?
No.
Sunil Verma has not joined. Okay. So this is
So
my
he's
last.
not joining. He's
Okay,
not
he has
joining.
not. So this is my last question. This is to, of course, again, Dr. Batra. What are the diagnostic parameters for pulmonary fibrosis, and how much is the relevance of CT scores? So then I will leave of course, because I have to switch over other. So Dr. Batra, please, what is the relevance of this CT scores, please?
Sir,
And,
usually
thank
we
you,
have-
MSN. Thank you, MSN, for providing this wonderful platform.
Thank you so
all
much,
the
sir.
best. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for sparing this much of time. I can understand that you are engaged in so many of the CME sessions in nowadays.
Okay.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot, sir, for sparing
you.
this much of time, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sridhar.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, yeah, Dr. Batra, sir, can you please answer the question, sir, please?
So, see, we have seen the patients before CT, after we do a CT scan. On discharge, also patient have high severity scores, but usually the severity scores are higher, but they show fibrotic opacities, maybe parenchymal bands, and some may show traction bronchiectasis also. So if patient shows interstitial thickening along with traction bronchiectasis and there are fibrotic bands, we generally tend to give them antifibrotics along with low dose of steroids. But usually these patients do well. So they definitely we have to see not only CT severity score, we have to see what kind of opacities are present, because CT severity score even before we start the treatment also is 22, and after we do a treatment then also it's 22. So it's not basically what is the score, it's basically what are the kind of opacities, whether patient has active ground glassing, consolidations, or patient has fibrotic opacities, interstitial thickening, or traction bronchiectasis. So we have to look for mainly for the opacities.
Yeah, there is one question coming for Dr. Joshi, sir, that there is too much of shortage happening of tocilizumab molecule in the marketplace. We can handle the situation with the newer molecules which we have shared nowadays, that is the cytokine storms situation which is there. With the tofacitinib molecule, can we handle this situation at present?
So, in my opinion, there are two things. First thing, cytokine storm at the start, and one is fully established. So, tofacitinib and this drug, what in my opinion, they work much better when you start at the initial kind of cytokine storm. So, when initial days, if you start, they prevent the further progression. Tocilizumab works much better initially also, but if the cytokine storm is too much, if the patient is having very high CRP and those things, you will have a better response to tocilizumab, in my opinion. The tocilizumab is short supply right now. I know, but itolizumab some people use. So itolizumab can also be used as an IL-6 blocker. People have started using bevacizumab also. There's VEGF blocker, but yes, in my opinion, in my clinical experience also, as I have seen more and more COVID patients, tocilizumab works much better than other drugs. But my idea is to tocilizumab you give it to hospitalized patient. Can you prevent the early patient with tofacitinib so that they don't require tocilizumab? So if we use tofacitinib and varafenib at the start, maybe 6-7 days, when you see that storm, then you can prevent that patient from receiving tocilizumab, and that's how we can use tocilizumab more judiciously, and with less tocilizumab also we can do much better. That's my opinion.
Thank you so much, sir, Joshi sir. Dr. Akshay, once again, I would like to understand from your side also. In fact, the same question is once again repeating on the screen, that the current situation of this tocilizumab shortage can be handled with this MABs which is available. Already, Dr. Joshi has already pointed on some points. Would you like to share some points on this?
So I absolutely agree with Dr. Joshi. So baricitinib and this particular new JAK inhibitor, they are really helpful, because even our hospital is one of the principal trial site for baricitinib. We have done the study, and we have seen excellent response in patients who have moderate disease, not severe disease. They require a minimal oxygen, say 1 to 4 liters, and we suspect them that they might end up into severe COVID. In those patients, JAK inhibitor works wonderfully. And regarding tocilizumab, yes, there are other alternatives, especially itolizumab. Itolizumab, in some patients, it works good, but bevacizumab, in my personal experience, it is not so useful. We have seen 3 patients who ended up into nemomedicine and subcutaneous emphysema after giving bevacizumab. Itolizumab works good, but it has to be given very slowly, because it shows some allergic reactions. There are more adverse effects than tocilizumab. But again, even tocilizumab is a double-edged sword. So it is all about the timing, when to give it. So you can't rely on just IL-6 marker. It is all about the timing. When the patient is having just moderate COVID, his saturation is between 90 to 94, or say 88 to 94. And we see that his oxygen requirement is rising day by day, or hour by hour, even hourly. In this particular second wave, the patients are deteriorating so fast. So that is the right time to give tocilizumab, but we don't have tocilizumab. Okay. People are buying it in black market. I don't know whether it is a genuine molecule, or we don't know about it. But tocilizumab does work, but the alternative is definitely JAK inhibitor, but it should be given with an antiviral, may it be favipiravir or remdesivir, at the right time. So from day 5 or day 6 of illness, we need to start antiviral and combine it with baricitinib or other JAK inhibitor.
One more question which is rushing on the screen, sir, which I could find out from several viewers, that what are the feature, what are the points which we need to take care, particularly for using an anticoagulant, when to start, how long to go, and which are the molecules we need to prefer on this. This question is coming towards Dr. Akshay for you and Dr. Supreet both. Can we have your points on this particular?
So, Dr. Batra, I'll start.
Yeah.
So, anticoagulation is very important. It depends whether the patient is being treated on outpatient basis or inpatient. So in inpatients, if we talk about inpatient, it is a standard protocol that we put any patient on DVT prophylaxis with a minimal dose of 0.4 or 0.6 enoxaparin once daily. And then according to the D-dimer report, we may increase the dose. So the mainstay of COVID treatment is anticoagulant, antiviral, and at some point steroid. These are the 3 most important drugs. And of course, if we are giving steroid, we need to give an antibiotic coverage, broad spectrum antibiotic coverage. Now, if we speak about the outpatient who are on teleconsults and their D-dimer is on the higher side, then we do consider, if their D-dimer is on the higher side, then only we start anticoagulant, which is oral anticoagulant. But people are using all kind of anticoagulants. Speaking about dabigatran, so dabigatran is ideally given after giving 5 to 10 days of parenteral anticoagulant. We cannot directly start dabigatran. But if we talk about rivaroxaban or apixaban, then yes, we do start it at a DVT prophylaxis dose, and we titrate it according to the D-dimer value. So anticoagulant is absolutely indicated in all kind of COVID patients, from moderate to severe, and in mild cases, only those patients who have a raised D-dimer level.
Yeah, Dr. Batra, would you like to share some points on it?
So regarding anticoagulation, as Akshay said, Dr. Akshay has said, For hospitalizations is always all patients. Invariably, every patient will be getting in hospital. But in outpatient, we have to see some comorbidities. Where the patient has some comorbidities, he is bedridden, he has some cardiovascular disease, or D-dimer is increased. Only in those cases we are giving oral anticoagulation at home. But none of the societies, American society, European society, nobody recommends that you should give home anticoagulation. You should never give, because there is more harm than benefit. Only if there are certain indications, the D-dimer is more than 1,000, or maybe you can say upper limit of 1,500, you can give. Or patient has cardiovascular comorbidities, patient is bed bound, cannot walk. In those cases only you should give. Otherwise, no recommendation of giving anticoagulation at home. And overlapping with enoxaparin or maybe a fragment deltaparin, but not the this one rivaroxaban and apixaban. They can be given directly, very easy to use, and I have not encountered any case of bleeding with these anticoagulation. They are very safe as of now.
Thank you so much, sir. I think more or less the questions which are reflecting on the screen are very well answered by all our speakers. Just 1 minute I would like to take from all of you, sir, that looking forward for your exclusive patronage towards the world-class international quality brands which we have got, that is Favilo, Tofados and Pulmofib, sir. And just one thing to share with you, sir, that we may be the young player, but our drive and enthusiasms are the best in the associating with yourself. So thank you so much for joining with all of us, sir. One thing to share with all of you that as we have shared, sir, that these new molecules we are able to bring in the Indian molecule very shortly because of our R&D facility available at Hyderabad. I would like to invite you from our core field of R&D facility at Hyderabad, sir. We have got the Asia's largest R&D facility available at Hyderabad. Once the things are getting settled down, sir, if you can spare your precious time along with the madam for some days at Hyderabad, sir, we would like to show you our R&D facilities. So thank you so much from my side, Dr. Supreet Batra, Dr. Piyush Joshi, and Dr. Buddhiraja for sparing your precious time and giving this enlightenment speech to our viewers.
Bye bye.
It's a nice,
Most welcome. Bye bye.
bye. Nice meet.